For decades, Nigeria, Africa's largest crude oil producer, has faced a paradox. A land rich in oil, yet dependent on foreign refineries to meet its domestic fuel needs. Nigeria, a nation blessed with an abundance of crude oil, one of Africa's largest producers, yet paradoxically plagued by decades of fuel scarcity. It's a story of immense potential, shadowed by systemic challenges. From an era defined by crippling fuel subsidies to the dawn of a new age led by private refining giants, this is the story of Nigeria's long, arduous road toward energy independence. It's a journey of policy missteps, economic pressures, and public outcry, now being fundamentally reshaped by the arrival of a single, monumental project, the Dangote Refinery. This is the chronicle of how a nation is attempting to reclaim its destiny, one barrel at a time. Our story begins in the early 2000s, a period of renewed democratic hope, but also of profound economic vulnerability. For the average Nigerian, the price of petrol wasn't just a number at the pump. It was a critical determinant of their daily survival, affecting the cost of transportation, food, and basic goods. The nation's own refineries, mismanaged and in disrepair, were operating at a fraction of their capacity. This forced Nigeria, an oil-exporting giant, into the absurd position of importing the vast majority of its refined petroleum products. To shield its citizens from the volatility of the global oil market, the government introduced a petrol subsidy scheme. The intention was noble: to ensure that fluctuations in international crude prices wouldn't translate into unbearable hardship for its people. The policy fixed the domestic price of petrol, and the government pledged to pay importers the difference between the landing cost of the fuel and this regulated local price. On the surface, it was a social safety net, a way to make life more affordable. But over time, this well-intentioned policy morphed into a catastrophic economic burden. The subsidy became a double-edged sword. While it kept pump prices low, it began to drain the nation's treasury at an alarming rate. The cost was staggering, consuming a significant portion of the national budget, money that was desperately needed for critical infrastructure, healthcare, and education. The subsidy didn't just create a financial hole, it fostered a sprawling ecosystem of inefficiency and corruption. Billions of dollars were spent annually to keep pump prices artificially low. In some years, the subsidy payments exceeded the entire budget for both education and healthcare combined. This created a perverse incentive structure. With the government guaranteeing profits, there was little motivation for the state-owned Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, or NNPC, to invest in rehabilitating its own dilapidated refineries. Why undertake the complex, expensive task of domestic refining when a simpler, more lucrative system of importation was in place? The subsidy, meant to be a temporary cushion, had become a permanent crutch, crippling the nation's ability to stand on its own. The system was opaque and notoriously difficult to audit, creating a fertile ground for corruption to flourish on an industrial scale. A shadowy network of fuel importers, often referred to as a cartel, quickly learned to exploit the scheme. They engaged in widespread malpractice, from over-invoicing for imported fuel to collecting subsidy payments for products that were never delivered at all. In some of the most egregious cases, subsidized Nigerian fuel was smuggled across the borders and sold at market prices in neighboring countries, with the criminals pocketing the difference. The subsidy, designed to help the poor, was instead making a select few unimaginably wealthy. The economic hemorrhage was unsustainable. By the early 2010s, the subsidy regime was costing Nigeria upwards of $7 billion a year, a figure that represented nearly a quarter of the entire federal budget. The nation was effectively borrowing money to fund the consumption of petrol. This immense financial pressure, coupled with the rampant corruption, made it clear that the system was broken. Attempts by successive governments to remove or reduce the subsidy were met with fierce public resistance and nationwide protests. For millions of Nigerians, the low fuel price was the only tangible benefit they felt they received from the nation's oil wealth. Removing it, without a viable alternative, felt like an act of betrayal. The country was trapped in a vicious cycle, and the long road to energy independence seemed more distant than ever. For decades, the rhythm of Nigeria's economy was dictated by a complex and often frustrating dance: the quest for foreign exchange. Private fuel marketers, the primary suppliers of petrol to the nation's 200 million people, were caught in this web. Their business model was simple in theory but fraught with peril in practice. To import refined petroleum products, they needed US dollars, a currency they had to acquire from the Central Bank of Nigeria. This process was rarely straightforward. Marketers would submit bids and wait, their operations held hostage by the availability of foreign currency reserves, which were themselves dependent on the fluctuating price of crude oil, the very commodity they were trying to bring back into the country in a refined form. This dependency created a fragile supply chain, where any disruption in FX allocation could trigger a nationwide crisis. The result was a recurring cycle of scarcity, panic buying, and the emergence of a thriving black market where fuel sold for double or triple the official price. While marketers navigated this volatile landscape, the nation's own refineries, 4 of them, all under the management of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, or NNPC, were sinking into obsolescence. These sprawling industrial complexes, designed to make Nigeria self-sufficient, were producing a negligible fraction of the country's daily fuel consumption, which hovered around 60 million liters. They had become symbols of squandered potential, their silence a stark contrast to the noisy desperation at the fuel pumps. By the mid-2010s, the government sought a new solution to bypass the chronic foreign exchange bottleneck. The answer was the Direct Sale Direct Purchase, or DSDP scheme. Launched in 2016, it was presented as a pragmatic masterstroke. The NNPC, which had now become the nation's sole importer of petrol, would no longer pay cash for imported fuel. Instead, it would engage in a sophisticated barter system. Nigeria would allocate a specific volume of its crude oil to a select group of international trading houses and refineries. In exchange, these partners were contractually obligated to deliver refined petroleum products, primarily petrol, of a corresponding value. On paper, the model was elegant. It insulated Nigeria's fuel supply from the volatility of its own currency reserves and promised a more stable, predictable importation process. The DSDP was meant to be a temporary bridge, a stopgap measure to guarantee fuel availability while the country finally fixed its ailing refineries. However, the bridge soon became a permanent highway, leading Nigeria deeper into a state of dependency. The scheme inadvertently disincentivized any urgent action on local refining. With a steady stream of imported fuel guaranteed through crude swaps, the political will to undertake the difficult, expensive, and politically fraught task of reviving domestic capacity evaporated. The DSDP, intended as a cure, became a crutch, entrenching Nigeria's reliance on refineries in the Netherlands, Belgium, India, and beyond. The nation was now exporting its own raw wealth only to re-import it as a finished, more expensive product, with the logistics and profits captured by foreign entities. The story of the refineries themselves is a tragedy of epic proportions, a saga of turnaround maintenance, or TAM. This industry term refers to a scheduled, intensive overhaul intended to restore a plant to peak operational efficiency. For Nigeria's refineries, however, TAM became a euphemism for a colossal drain of public funds. Year after year, administration after administration, budgets were announced with great fanfare. Billions of dollars were allocated for the rehabilitation of the 2 refineries in Port Harcourt and the single plants in Warri and Kaduna. Contracts were awarded, deadlines were set, and press releases assured the public that self-sufficiency was just around the corner. But the corner was never turned. A 2020 report revealed that the three refinery complexes had incurred a combined operating loss of over 150 billion naira in a single year, without processing a single barrel of crude oil. The funds earmarked for maintenance seemed to vanish into a labyrinth of opaque contracts and questionable expenditures, leaving behind a trail of audits and public outrage, but no functional machinery. The refineries became silent giants, their vast networks of pipes, distillation columns, and catalytic crackers standing as monuments to systemic failure. They were no longer assets but liabilities, consuming billions in operational costs and maintenance budgets while producing nothing. The workers who once ran these plants were reduced to a skeleton staff, reporting to work in facilities that were, for all intents and purposes, industrial museums. The dream of Nigerian refined fuel for Nigerian citizens had dissolved into a recurring nightmare of wasted resources and broken promises. Every administration promised to fix Nigeria's refineries, but the problems went deeper than machinery. They were structural, bureaucratic, and political. From poor funding and obsolete technology to conflicting interests between government agencies and unions, refinery rehabilitation became a national mirage. Private investors were discouraged, while smuggling and cross-border leakages thrived. As the state-owned giants faltered, a new strategy began to take shape, born from a mix of necessity and entrepreneurial spirit. This was the era of the marginal and modular refineries. Unlike the sprawling complexes of the past, these were smaller, more agile, privately owned plants. The concept was simple yet revolutionary for Nigeria: decentralized refining capacity. Modular refineries, with capacities typically ranging from 5,000 to 30,000 barrels per day, could be constructed faster and at a fraction of the cost of their larger counterparts. They were designed to be deployed in oil-producing regions, processing crude right at the source. This approach was meant to tackle multiple problems at once: boost the nation's dangerously low domestic refining output, create localized employment, and, crucially, provide a legitimate alternative to the rampant and environmentally devastating illegal refining operations in the Niger Delta. The government, through various initiatives and licensing rounds, encouraged private investment, hoping that a constellation of these smaller plants could collectively make a significant dent in the country's reliance on imported fuel. While a promising step, they faced immense hurdles, from securing consistent crude oil feedstock to navigating complex financing and regulatory landscapes. They were a vital part of the solution, but the scale of Nigeria's fuel deficit required something far more audacious. Then, on the swampy coastline of the Lekki Free Zone, a project of almost unimaginable scale began to rise. This wasn't just another refinery, it was a statement. The game changer had arrived: the Dangote Refinery. Bankrolled by Aliko Dangote, Africa's wealthiest individual, this was a private sector undertaking on a national, even continental scale. The numbers are staggering. A $20 billion investment, culminating in a colossal complex built to process 650,000 barrels of crude oil every single day. To put that into perspective, Nigeria's total daily consumption of petroleum products hovers around 55 million liters. The Dangote Refinery is engineered to produce 65 million liters daily, meaning for the first time in its modern history, a single facility could meet 100% of the country's domestic demand for all refined products: gasoline, diesel, kerosene, and aviation fuel, and still have a massive surplus. Its design as the world's largest single-train refinery is a marvel of engineering efficiency. Unlike older refineries with multiple, smaller processing units, a single-train design integrates all processing into one seamless, optimized flow, maximizing output and minimizing energy loss. The sheer physical scale is breathtaking. It covers an area 7 times larger than Victoria Island in Lagos, utilizes enough steel to build the Eiffel Tower 3 times over, and is crisscrossed by over 2,100 kilometers of pipeline. This project was conceived as a self-contained industrial ecosystem. It includes its own 435 megawatt power plant, capable of powering the entire city of Ibadan. It has its own deep-water port with multiple jetties, designed to handle the world's largest crude vessels. And it's integrated with one of the world's largest ammonia and urea fertilizer plants, turning a byproduct of the refining process into a critical resource for Nigeria's agricultural sector. The strategic implications were profound. For the first time, Nigeria was on the verge of not just refining for itself, but becoming a major exporter of petroleum products. The refinery's capacity is so vast that its surplus could supply the entire West African region and even compete in markets across Europe and Latin America. This represented a seismic shift, transforming Nigeria from Africa's largest importer of refined fuel into its premier refining hub. The economic ripple effects are immense, from saving the country up to $30 billion annually in foreign exchange spent on fuel imports, to creating hundreds of thousands of direct and indirect jobs. The activation of the Dangote Refinery is more than an industrial achievement. It's a pivotal moment in Nigeria's long and often painful energy story. It challenges the narrative of dysfunction and decay that has plagued the sector for decades. This single project holds the potential to stabilize the nation's economy, eliminate the ruinous fuel subsidy regime, and redraw the energy map of an entire continent. This marks the beginning of a potential energy independence revolution, a turning point from which there may be no looking back. The emergence of Dangote Refinery is a beacon of hope, but also a test case. Its benefits include job creation, forex savings, and self-reliance. Yet challenges loom: market pricing, policy consistency, and the risk of a monopoly shift, from state control to private dominance. Nigeria's fuel distribution system must adapt, from infrastructure upgrades to transparent regulation, to ensure efficiency across the supply chain. To sustain this progress, Nigeria must focus on completing the rehabilitation of existing refineries, incentivizing marginal refiners through tax reliefs and crude supply access, establishing clear pricing frameworks to attract investors, encouraging export competitiveness and regional supply balance. The goal is not just to refine crude, but to build a sustainable, competitive refining ecosystem. The world is watching. With Dangote's entry, West Africa could become a net exporter of refined products. This may reduce Europe's dominance in the African fuel market and shift trade patterns across the Atlantic. However, global investors remain cautious, citing Nigeria's regulatory uncertainties and infrastructure deficits. To truly compete, Nigeria must blend policy reform, technology adoption, and transparent governance. From decades of dependency to the dawn of self-sufficiency, Nigeria stands at a crossroads. The success of Dangote Refinery is not just about one man's vision. It is about a nation's will to redefine its destiny. As the refinery flames rise over Lekki, one question remains: will this be the light that finally ends Nigeria's dark refining history, or just another flicker in the storm? Kindly like, share, and subscribe to CMayor's Digital Hub.